Hi, let us discuss SA 260 communication of those charges with governance. Before moving into this standard part, it is essential to understand certain basic concept. Management is responsible for preparation of financial statement in accordance with applicable FRF, and those charges with governance have responsibility for overseeing the financial procedure of the organization. And it is essential to understand two definitions: those charges with governance and management. Those charges with governance are the topmost people who are with the organization, who have the responsibility for formulating strategic financial decision, and also have an obligation for accountability of the organization that include overseeing financial operations and financial procedure. And management is a person who is responsible for conducting the day-to-day activity of an organization, and also have an obligation for implementation of strategic decisions, which is formulated by TCWG. And auditor's responsibility is to form and express an opinion on financial statement. Thus, the management, TCWG, and the auditor will go hand in hand. And what are the circumstances this standard mentions for the communication? Auditor need to establish an effective two-way communications with those charges with governance. Why? Auditor need to understand the entity and the environment in which it operates in order to reduce the risk of material misstatement, and those charges with governance will help a lot in this aspect. Similarly, those charges with governance need to get timely information on significant matters which comes into the notice of auditor in the course of audit, for enabling, for facilitating their overseeing function. Thus, the communication process have significant impacts. Let us move further. Auditors' communications with those charges with governance will not relieve the management for their respective communication, and management communication to those charges with governance in the matter which is specified by the auditor to communicate with TCWG will not relieve the auditor for their respective communication. And a clear communications on specified matters as specified by this standard is an integral part of the communication. But laws and regulations which require to communicate the auditor under certain circumstances, which also prohibit the auditor for not to communicate on certain matter. Example, certain procedure has been undertaken by appropriate authority which includes an illegal or suspected acts. In that case, auditor refrain from communicate to those charges with governance. And what are the objective of this standard is? The objective of this standard is to establish an effective two-way communication. Second main objective is auditor need to communicate in clear way the auditor's responsibilities on financial statement and the scope and timing of an audit. Third, the purpose of communication is to obtain relevant information which will facilitate for the purpose of auditor's audit in an effective manner. Last, those charges with governance also require to understand the significant observations which auditors find out in the course of his audit. Next, the communication process. What is the communication channel and process? The channel. Auditor need to decide in those charges with governance structure with whom communications required to be made. And in the organization where there is a substructure such as audit committee or supervisory board, in that situation, auditor also need to determine whether the same communication need to be made to the substructure and those two charges with governance, the main structure, substructure and main structure. And some organization where a small organization like partnership firm or something like that, where the management and those charges with governance are the one and the same person, and in such circumstances there need to make two communications twice the same matter. Communicating the same matter twice need not be required. Then what is the standards matter, what the standards stipulate? We already discussed. It is the duty of an auditor to form and express an opinion on financial statement, and management and those charges with governance is not relieved from their concerned responsibility. Thus the communication process comes into an existence. What are the matter generally discussed between auditor and those charges with governance? The following are the matters which are discussed. The planned scope, which includes significant risk identified by the auditor. The scope is influenced by significant risk identified by the auditor and the proposed timing of an audit. Auditor and those charges with governance will discuss the qualitative aspects of financial practice, qualitative aspects of financial statements, which include what are the accounting policies, what are the accounting estimate, and what are the disclosure in financial statement. These are the qualitative accounting practices, and if there is any deviation or changes in such practice, auditor required to communicate to TCWG why it is adopting a applicable FRF which is different from the entity, the circumstances in which it is situated. Second, auditor required to communicate the significant difficulties, if any. If there arise any significant difficulties such as unwillingness by the management or unavailability of the person, or unwillingness by the management to provide the information and explanations required by the management for the purpose of audit, and within an unreasonable brief time within which audit is required to be completed, there is an extra push put by the management. There are unexpected extraordinary effort is required to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. Lack of availability of information. Management is reluctant to take their responsibility for ensuring the concept of going concern. And point number 3, significant matters discussed or correspondence with the matter already discussed. Then the forms and content of report. If there is any changes in forms and content of audit report, how the forms will appear or what are the content in audit report, this matter also be discussed. And the significant observations and finding in the course of audit, such as deficiency in internal control is a significant matter, or non-compliance with the pollution board's requirement is a significant matter, required to be communicated to those charges with governance. Let us move into the listed companies' additional communications. What are the additional communications with those charges with governance? In case of listed company, auditor required to communicate to those charges with governance the additional requirement of compliance with ethical requirement and independent requirement. He has to submit or show a proof that all the members of his audit engagement team and the firm in himself is comply with the ethical requirement. The auditor is required to communicate with those charges with governance, the form, content and timing of communication. This is called establishing the communication process. Auditor also required to communicate in written form, not in oral form, the significant finding which he come across in the course of performing the audit. If auditor is not establishing a communication process, then he has to evaluate the risk of material misstatement due to lack of sufficient and appropriate evidence. That impact has to be analyzed. Auditor has to decide the timing of communication, that at what time and what form and what content communication is required to be moved. And it is not practical to have all communications in writing. If the communication is in oral format, sometime it may be happen, then it is sufficient if auditor subsequently document the same and file it in audit engagement letter. Thus it is our small discussion about the essay. Why? Because management has the responsibility for financial statement and auditor has the responsibility over financial statement, and TCWG, those charges with governance, also have the responsibility with financial statement. Thus, thank you for watching these small discussions with me.